We are going to go ahead and get started. Good evening, everyone. My name is Karen Dodd. I'm the Chief Performance Officer at the Kentucky Department of Education. It's my pleasure to welcome all of you here tonight for our ninth town hall. Yeah, I've lost count. This is our final town hall. So thank you all so much for coming out. Just a few logistics. Bathrooms are actually right out here. Women's is out this way, men's is out the back way. They can go out the back and around to get to the restrooms. If you haven't yet gotten any food, they have plenty of food and drinks over here. Please feel free to get up and help yourself at any time. This is very informal. We do not have any breaks scheduled in, but you are welcome to get up, stretch your legs. We will go for a full hour and a half. Each one has gotten a little bit longer, I will say. But we will have Q&A at the end. On your tables, you will find a couple of things. We have what Jennifer Stafford, Dr. Stafford is going to be going over tonight, which is our Framework 2.0. So you have a copy of that. You also have this Q&R code little half sheet of paper. So one of them is to find out more about the accountability model. That top one is for more examples. We're going to hear from Fleming County tonight, and they're going to tell you what they have been doing when it comes to local accountability. So you're in for quite a treat tonight. But if you want more information, the last two are about becoming more engaged with us. So if you are super excited over everything that you hear tonight and you want to know how to get more involved, click on that third QR code and you will have some options as to how you can become more involved moving forward. And then if you have any questions or comments that we don't get to tonight or something that you don't want to ask out loud, that final QR code allows you to type in any questions that you have and we will get back to you. We're also putting together a frequently asked questions and we will have all of that out on our resource page within the next few weeks or the next few days, sorry. So I think that's everything. So with that, I am going to go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Robbie Fletcher.
Thanks so much, Karen. And before I get started, everybody has a time limit. So even the commissioner has a 10-minute time limit. But since I'm home, I'm going to give you just a little bit of an update on Robbie Fletcher's family because I've had so many of you to ask, and I really appreciate that. And whenever you return home, the first thing you got to do is talk about family, all right?
Yeah.
So the very first thing I want you to know is the job's going well. We're going to open up a lot of doors, talking with legislators. Not say we always agree. Some great conversations. Sometimes it's hard to hide the redneck every now and then, to be honest. But no, seriously, it's been great to be able to walk through the hallways of the Capitol and be able to sit and talk with people about issues that's happening within our state. So for Robbie, it's been good. It's been a good experience. It's breakneck speed, to be honest. But again, it's been very good. As far as the rest of the family, those of you that know Missy is now an assistant professor of medicine, family medicine at UK. She sees patients there at Georgetown, just 4 miles from our house. And she actually had her first patient to shadow her just the other day. So Missy's doing very well. My daughter is trying to be like her mother. I could not talk her into going to education. She's in her second year of medical school and took her very last paper and pencil test in medical school just the other day. So she's getting ready for the step one, the medical licensure. So that's our next step. And then of course Eli is here in Lawrence County as he is finishing up. He moved to Scott County with us for about 10 days and he came in. He said, Dad, would it kill Mom if I went back home? And he said, they're good to me here at Scott County, but it's just not with my parents. I said, absolutely. So he gets steak or whatever he wants from the grandparents every single night. He's doing well. Don't worry about Eli, but he's with his parents. So that's the family update. Thank you for asking. I want to make sure that everybody had that opportunity. Now let's get to business. Can we start my timer now? All right. First of all, well, thank you so much for being here. One of the things that you're going to find as we go through this evening, this is going to be the common theme. This is what we're kind of building all this work into. We firmly believe that in order to build a prosperous Kentucky, we will launch an accountability system that is both meaningful and useful to all learners. In order to have an accountability system that is both meaningful and useful to all learners, We firmly believe that local accountability has to play a big part in this. And the reason for that is we're such a diverse Commonwealth. What we have available in Ashland versus what's available in Lawrence County versus what's available in Jefferson, Fayette, or Menifee, or others is different. The connections that we have with our communities are different, but also our community needs are different. So this is really built on what exactly does the community expect of us? When I say us, I'm talking about our schools. How do we get our business leaders involved? How do we have the opportunity to give them the data that they want to hear? And it's going to be built on this, what we call the moonshot. In order to build a prosperous Kentucky, we truly believe we're going to launch an accountability system that is both meaningful and useful to all learners. Local accountability has to play a major part. There's always three big ideas that you're going to find in everything that we talk about. The very first one is vibrant learning. And if you want to talk about what exactly vibrant learning is, the word that I would come to mind would be relevant. What's relevant to the student? And I've used this example every single time, and I love this example. I'll go back to some of our Eastern Kentucky schools. How many of you have some experience with the tiny house project? Tiny house, exactly. So if you look at the tiny house project, you have essentially a district. This started probably over a decade ago. You have districts that apply for a grant. They got a $10,000 grant, and then they basically got a trailer and $10,000 and said, have at it. So you'd have your engineering classes to design the tiny house. You'd have your carpentry class to build the tiny house. You'd have your electricity classes to wire the tiny house. You'd have your art classes to paint the tiny house. And then at the end, you'd also have your business classes managing your budgets. Now, after that, all that got finished and you got to the end of the year, you would have those tiny houses would be sent to Pikeville and put on an auctioning block. And one in particular, I want to say this, I think it was Knox County, I believe it was. Knox County had one that was purchased by a gentleman from California. And he drove all the way from California with his old truck and his ball and hitch and towed that tiny house back, stopped at different landmarks, took pictures, and sent it back to the kids. And now that tiny house is on the Pacific coast. Now, to take that a step farther, there's been kids that worked on some of those tiny houses that have their own businesses now, building tiny houses. Want to talk about relevant now? Not only that, when they auctioned off these houses, there was always a competition because you wanted to make a little more money. So the next year, the design would be a little bit better. Maybe there'd be solar panels added. That's relevant learning. We've also talked about other districts. For example, in Christian County, there's a student in Christian County, due to his work-based learning, that works for a drone company. There are people from all over the world calling this 17-year-old, asking questions about their drones, how to fix them, how to design them. They have no clue that's a 17-year-old high school student. He has to step out of class on a regular basis to take these phone calls. We also have a student, I want to say Bullitt County, or was it Shelby County, the third grader? Bullitt. We have a Bullitt County student in his writing classes. He's written 2 books, published them on Amazon. And you know what? I can go all around this room and talk about similar experiences that's going on for our kids. That's vibrant learning. That's things that matter to the kids. They're taking what they're learning, it's relevant, it's applicable, and they're doing something with it outside the 4 walls. And you're going to see some great, again, I'm very excited to see Dr. Kreisman and his group's presentation here shortly. The other idea, and I won't go into as much detail about the others, is innovation as it comes to accountability. Different districts have different models. Some districts will have different models on what type of accountability model they're using. For example, Logan County. Logan County has 4 different pillars as part of their system, and the 4th pillar is student well-being. Yes, they have student achievement. Yes, they have student growth. Yes, they have readiness. And their 4th one is well-being, which goes into student attendance. It also goes to what percentage of our kids are participating in co-curricular or extracurricular activities. What percentage of our kids are in a drama production? What percentage are in a band, in the band? What percentage is on the football field? Basketball teams. If you look at the research, a great indicator for how successful a student, if a student's going to be successful once they leave our four walls, is how involved they are outside the classroom setting. Logan County made that a priority, and they built their improvement plan around the idea of making sure every student is involved. And that goes into also, if you look at defenses of learning, we have defenses of learning going on across the Commonwealth that where students are coming in, talking about what they're doing in their classrooms, defending their learning with business leaders in the community, and they're walking out with job offers. How do you build that into a local accountability system? And that's one of the things you're going to see a little bit later. Then the last thing, none of this happens without collaboration. You have to have business leaders, you have to have your families, you have to have people be involved. And for example, I'll use Kerry Ballinger down in Rockcastle County. They started doing the local accountability model, said they would never turn back, even if this wasn't part of the accountability system, because it's made such a difference in their district and the faith that the community is having within their district, because we're giving them data that they want to know, they want to see, and they see that it's relevant for kids. So those three big ideas you're going to hear a lot about today: vibrant learning, accelerating innovation, especially when it comes to accountability, but also to collaboration with local communities. Very briefly, going over where we've been. This work didn't start at KDE. This started with local districts. There are so many districts across the state that started out with some different varieties of a local accountability model with dashboards. There are thousands of educators that have contributed to this point to us to get here. Started off in 2021, being a part of a listening tour. And then what amazed me is being a part of the Kentucky Coalition for Advancing Education, which I was on one of the members of that. In Lawrence County, we started doing empathy interviews. We asked our community to say, tell us a story about our school system. And it amazed me how many of those stories came back to accountability. Thank you for the nice test scores, but our kids are much more than that. And honestly, that kind of threw me back a little bit, because honestly, I was all about test scores. That was one of the reasons I was hired in Lawrence County. Done some turnaround in Martin County in 2 different schools. Come into Lawrence County, let's do the same. So I was all about test scores. But I also realized we weren't relevant for every single one of our kids. I can't say that I can take credit for that. That came from my team at Lawrence County. How are we really relevant for our kids? Now, moving into the 2022-23, the Kentucky United Learn Council was formed, and it was really became an accountability focus, which is where the moonshot came from, that you just saw. In 2024, last year and into this year, we put this bullet in there because, first of all, I want you to know that we're listening. There's been 4 different prototypes of what this new state model could look like. After putting the first one out, it was a kind of a generic, I won't say generic, kind of a broad pathway, if you will, where we could go. We got input, we did surveys, then there was a second prototype. We got input, we took surveys, talked to full council, then there's a third prototype, then a fourth prototype. And now we're on 2.0, which is what you're going to see. And I promise you, after tonight and the input that we've got from the town halls, there'll be a 3.0. And Dr. Stafford did such a great job of going through where we are on our prototypes. I'm sorry, on the model framework. Very excited about where we are, but there's some things that we need to change moving forward. I'm going to challenge you, let's not get stuck so much on the federal accountability piece. That's part of this. We are very focused on math and reading. We're not taking that away. We're not hiding from it. We want to make sure that we give that return on investment that our legislators have given on numeracy and literacy. We owe it to them. We owe it to our kids. With that being said, to me, the most astounding part of this is the local accountability piece. And it's so exciting. Of course, we're right now in the middle of town halls, and we're hoping by 2026, we'll be able to do a recommendation to the General Assembly. So after we hear from you, we're going to start, actually, we've had, are there any legislators in the room, by the way? Any legislators? We've had several legislators to show up to the town hall, and we've also had legislators be a part of the pool council. So it's been great to have their input along the way. And if we can have that recommendation, it'd be great. I kind of touched on this just a little bit. There's 2 parts. to the accountability model, there's a federal piece. And the goal with the federal piece is to streamline it to this is what's required from the federal government. Let's not go any farther than what's required. And we'll talk about those buckets that we have to fill from the federal piece. And of course, tomorrow that may change. Who knows? You know, when I have an executive order, it may change some things. And I don't say that lightly. But again, even if there's any change, I still feel like this is a great model. So keep that in mind. So regardless of what an executive order looks like, I believe this is a great model. But also, too, in the federal piece, you have to have a uniform system for labeling, for identifying CSI, TSI, and ATSI schools. It's only fair, but it's also required. So that's why that federal piece, one of the reasons why the federal piece is there. We want to make sure that we have a uniform process, a uniform method, uniform data, standardized data, or standard data that we can compare other districts, and then make sure we get districts that need that help. Of course, I'll go back to the local accountability piece. Oh, from the federal part, we're also trying to push some interim assessments. So you're going to see some things that's very different for KDE, because we firmly believe that you shouldn't have to wait till the fall to get the test done. That's the first thing I've had. But with that being said, how can we help you with interim assessments to move along the way? Similar to what you're doing with MAP and STAR, I recognize it. Now, as far as local accountability, we want you to have flexibility. What does your community expect of you? How are you presenting this material? I'll give Dr. Creasman a little bit of props before he gets started here. He actually I think they're on 4.0 now. Is that correct, Dr. Creasman? So with 3.0, he actually presented that to some superintendents and some colleagues and said, what do you think? And they said, this is a little busy. How can we trim this down? What changes can we make? And he listened. And so that's the other part of this local accountability. How can we build networks where districts are working together? Woodford County gave a great presentation. One of my favorite slides, besides the pictures of the students, was the slide that had every district they're collaborating with. One was Johnson County, one was Rowland County, one was Clark County, Clark, Woodford, Shelby, Logan. And notice that's a wide range of the Commonwealth. They were all working together to develop local accountability models. And we want to make sure we kind of build those teams and those networks. We also want to give you the opportunity not only to outside your district, but also strongly encourage what's going on inside your district, those collaborations also. Say a lot. And thankfully, you won't hear from me again until the very end when there's some questions, if you have some. What I want you to think about is, as we go through, we have a welcome introduction. We've done that. We'll talk about vibrant learning. I really enjoy this part of it. The local accountability, to be honest, is the best part. You'll get to see what's happening in one of our districts. And then the model framework, Dr. Stafford will give that to you. And then the question and answer session, what I'd like for you to do is take some notes and say, put some wows and some wonders. What are some things you're like, man, this is something, Dr. Pleasure, please don't change this. I'm amazed by this. Or these are some questions that we may have moving forward. So that's what I want you to kind of keep in mind as we do. That being said, I think Ms. Harden is going to go through and talk about vibrant a little bit better than what the commissioner did.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Alexa Harden, and I am the Regional Innovation Specialist for Northern and Eastern Kentucky. And for the next little bit, we're really going to take a deep dive into vibrant learning and what that means and what it could look like across the Commonwealth. But before we get started, we always want to ground our work in the most important thing, and that's our kids. So I'd love for you now to take out your phone, and I want you to find a picture of a child that you love. This may be your child, it may be a niece, a nephew, a grandchild, it might even be a student. But as you're looking for that picture, I want you to consider a couple of things. I want you to consider how special that child is to you, but also what kind of learner are they? And what kind of learning experiences do you want for that child? So once you found your picture, turn to someone sitting next to you and show them off. Thank you. So I'm not sure if you noticed, but the volume of the room changed, the look on your faces changed, and that's because you were experiencing joy, which is exactly what we want for our kids every single day in our classrooms across the Commonwealth. So let's take a look at some examples. How many of us in here, when we were learning something new in the classroom, learned it from reading a chapter out of a textbook? Probably several of us, right? And that's exactly what we see in a traditional setting. Students are learning about pollinators. So they're reading the information from the text. They are taking some notes. They're completing worksheets. And then for their assessment, they're completing a multiple choice quiz over what they've learned. But this example also comes from the Commonwealth. These students are learning the very same content. Students were faced with a driving question that focused on the dangers that pollinators face, but also the benefits that they have to other plants and animals. Students conducted their own research, they put together a presentation, and then they developed a plan to create a pollinator garden at their school. And this was possible through collaboration with community members. Here's another example from a middle school. Students are learning about body systems. Again, to learn about those body systems in that traditional setting, reading information from a textbook, taking notes, copying down definitions, completing worksheets, and then for their assessment, they were asked to write a summary over what they learned. But let's look at this example. Again, these students learning the very same content. This classroom was faced with a driving question: what's going on in McKenna's body making her feel the way that she does? So students were placed in medical teams where they conducted their own research and put together a presentation of their findings that they presented to medical experts from their community. And then many of us in here have probably read the novel To Kill a Mockingbird, and we're probably asked to write an essay defending our stance on if we felt the main character was a hero or not. And if we're being completely honest, the only person who read that was probably the teacher grading, right? But again, this example comes from our state. These students also read the novel, but they were faced with a driving question: what makes someone a hero? So these students read a collection of fiction and nonfiction texts, and then they put together a video for their school's Activism Week where they shared their definition, but also shared information in ways that students could stand up to injustice based off of information that we've learned from the past. Many of you have probably already seen this, but I think it's really important that we look at it again. This definition of vibrant learning comes to us from the Kentucky United We Learn Council. This council is made up of teachers, school and district leaders, parents, community members, legislators, all of which who want the very same thing for their kids as we want for ours. And if you look at those bold words, you'll see relevance, authentic and joyful learning, personalized products. Again, probably what you said you wanted for the child that you love. Here's another fabulous example. It comes to us out of Spencer County, and this was the Dream Homeorama project. And this little girl sums it up so much better than I ever could. But I think it's important to note that this activity and this vibrant learning experience capitalizes on her strengths. It capitalizes on her creativity. And it also shows her and other students what's happening in your classroom matters, right? It's creating that relevance for our kids. In 2022, Kentucky Board of Ed adopted Kentucky's Portrait of a Learner, which is a collection of knowledge, skills, and competencies that students should know and be able to do upon graduation. This is the model. Many districts are working with their own communities to create their own, based off of what's important and what's relevant to that community and to those students. We currently have a little over 140 districts who already have a portrait or are currently developing their own portrait of a learner. And many of these districts are now in the process of creating performance assessment systems that are focused around those exhibitions of learning and those defenses of learning. If you think back to that picture that you were showing off earlier, we don't know what our world's going to look like in 20 years, 10 years, 5 years, 1 year. But we know if they're going to be successful, they have to have these durable skills. Again, I think it's super important to come back to this moonshot. The way we get here is through the collaboration with school districts and local communities to determine what's important to the people that our school districts serve. So that brings us to what is local accountability? So we are so fortunate tonight to be able to hear from Fleming County as they talk a little bit about their local accountability system. But local accountability in a nutshell, again, is school districts partnering with communities to determine what is meaningful, what is valuable, what is important to the community. And then the school district reports out on those things that mean something, again, to the people that they serve. Kentucky really is finding ourselves in the midst of a movement right now. We have districts that are collaborating with one another now more than ever, and school districts collaborating with their communities, again, to determine what matters most to the people they serve. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Brian Priestman and his team, and they are going to tell us a little bit about their local accountability system and how it's impacted their community, but more importantly, how it's affected the student experience in their district.
Good evening. Thanks for having us. I talk about this all the time. I'm very passionate about it. I dream about it. I wake up at it. I talk about this all the time. Just going back to what Alexis said about collaboration, we entertain about 30, 40 districts per year. They come in, we give them everything we have, trying to give them about vibrant learning or portrait of a learner or local accountability model. I mean, we try to help as much as we can. We're an L3 district. Like Johnson County, we were among the first cohort with L3. We've taken that very serious. And it's also selfish, right? If we help try to sell this, it helps us in the long run. So it's in our vested interest to do this. So always start with this, local accountability, what it's not. I'm not trying, Fleming County is not trying, or Rockcastle or Greenup or Shelby or Kenton. We're not trying to lower expectations here. We're actually trying to increase expectations with reading, math, and writing, all those important areas, but by making it more relevant to kids, right? And it's not an anti-testing move. All we're advocating for is better, more effective testing, more holistic picture of a kid. That's all local accountability is. And I hear it, obviously, right, but it's really not. And if you look at our models, if you look at Greenups, if you look at Rock Castles, if you look at Kentons, if you look at Shelby's, we're not trying to lower expectations there. And we're testing kids. So it's not an anti-testing movement. We're just giving more effective, more performance-based assessments than settling on that one single data point. By the way, I don't look at the state report card. I tell everybody, Tom was with me when we testified in front of the Joint Committee. I can't tell you where that new report card's housed. I tell everybody, if you're talking about report cards, let's talk about Fleming County's local dashboard. So really what we're trying to focus on is that holistic picture of the kid. No more single data points. And one of the things that we really try to do is we use iReady, but it doesn't mean you can't use map. It doesn't mean you can't use stars, right? So we work with iReady. They turn the adaptive piece off. We're piloting a piece of this through course assessments. Everything Cool was doing, we were trying to give examples of, just to see if this would actually work. I just tell people, don't knock it until you try, right? So what we're trying to do is give a big picture of a student in reading, for instance. We look at the students' iReady scores. We look at students' standard-based mastery. We look at students' performance assessments in reading, and I'll give you an example of that. And it also goes to vibrant learning, but Michelle Hunter, Chief Academic Officer, is going to talk about that. So if you look at senior English, if you're an English teacher, just bear with me, you'll gasp. If you look at the senior English, 11th grade, 12th grade English standards, I'm going to use this, I'm not an English teacher. It doesn't say thou shalt use Shakespeare. They're very broad. So what we did for 12th grade is we said, okay, let's pull out these novels. Let's insert the OSHA 10 manual for our CT students, right? So if you look at the students' ACT scores or KSA scores or K-Prep back then, you would think, God, these kids are illiterate. But it's a funny mystery to me. The kids walked out with OSHA 10 certification. That OSHA 10 manual, Lexile of 1300. So are we boring the kids to death, or is it that they can't read? So that's about vibrant learning. You know your kids, you change the curriculum, you change the learning experiences to try to give a better picture. And that's what federal testing does for the past 30 years. That single data point, we do everything about a kid and we label those kids. I'm not saying they can't read. I'm not saying they can't do math. I'm not saying they can't write. But surely to God, in 2025, we can get more data points and know more about our kids than just a single data point. And that's where this local accountability really comes into play, because there's no way Frankfurt is close enough to know our kids. These local accountability models can really be molded to your communities, towards your kids. So this is why I'm so passionate about this. My kid, I've got 11-year-old Georgia. If you follow my blog, if you follow social media, God knows you know about it, right? But she's dyslexic. She has trouble with these standardized testing. But it's funny, there's a mystery to me. When we give her performance things, she's fine, right? So I think there's 600,000 Georgias across the Commonwealth. And we've got to figure out a way to really meet these kids where they are. She's very artistic too. So if you give her anything to draw, she's there. But really, if you look at local accountability, it's really designed for communities, for the communities it serves. There's not an accountability model, federal or state, that really meets that, right? They're arbitrary metrics. And honestly, if you look at federal and state, there's always going to be failure. Bell curve, right? I mean, there's always going to be someone losing. So we're always going to paint these kids that can't read. Kids can't read, kids can't do math. But we're also on the other end. Some kids can just do a test. Does that mean that kid can test, can read or do math? I don't know. But with local accountability, we can get more data points about the kid. But really, if you look, it really restores that relationship with their communities. Post-COVID, we need to do a lot of damage control in public ed. And it's our chance to really listen and bring those voices into public education. and actually say, hey, if this isn't working, then help us. It's about reciprocal accountability. Everybody's part of this. The community's part of it. We did it a little different. We started with our students. We started with measuring what mattered to students. Then we brought the community in. So we understood exactly what was going on, what our kids really wanted in the learning. I'm not going to go all over that. I'm sure KDE will release this, but I'll also mention this. We've worked with KDE and the Cool Council from day one. We're on 4.0. We're getting ready. We're close to 4.1 release. But I know I drive KDE crazy because we're constantly calling. I text the commissioner at 6 a.m. on a Saturday and say, hey, he's probably, I'm his alarm clock sometimes. But we are doing great things here in the Commonwealth. We have a once in a generation moment that the commissioner, the state board, the Department of Ed is giving us. And if you listen to what elected officials are saying, they're also saying this. They don't want this stuff up in Washington. They want it right here back in the Commonwealth. And if you think back, I wasn't here, I'm a North Carolinian, but if you think back to the early 90s, it was Kentucky, Florida, Texas, and North Carolina who really changed this dynamic with accountability. It's our chance here in the Commonwealth to lead that conversation again. But if you look at these 6 districts, take off Fleming. These other 5 districts, they're doing some great stuff here. I'm Tracy. I just saw Tracy walk in from Greenup County. I'm her biggest fan, what she's doing with Greenup County's dashboard. If you haven't seen it, you need to go see it. And all it is Canva, right? We're not spending look, I start with free and work my way up. We don't start with $100,000 dashboards. And I know Greenup County doesn't do that either. Also, the commissioner mentioned Rockcastle. Awesome stuff they're doing there. And if you've not looked at Shelby, they've got a really unique dashboard going on. It's less data and it's more storytelling about what's going on in their classrooms and what's going on with their kids. I know that community is eating that up. And Kenton County was, they're about 6 months ahead of us, but they're doing great work there. They really opened the door to all these other districts. Kenton County and Rockcastle were not original L3s. By the way, there's nothing on the books that says you can't do local accountability. So you don't have to be an L3 to do that. So what we're seeing across the Commonwealth, there's 3 entry points. There's the portrait of a learner. If you're doing that effectively, you're eventually going to say, okay, we've got to change something here. And Michelle's going to go over that. Then you've got your continuous improvement. And then that strategic planning that we're seeing play out across the Commonwealth. So there's 3 entry points, but there's others. We've just not discovered them yet. But I will say this. If I was not a local accountability district, I would say, I don't want those 6 districts determining what's happening at the state level. If I was a district, I would say, hey, we can do this. Trust me, I'm rarely the smartest guy in the room. So if we can do it, I know everybody else can do it. Does it take a lot of work? You betcha. But it's really good work because you're changing the narrative from, we surveyed kids and they just said, stop referring to us as a test score. Parents are also saying that too. So now we can change that narrative with their local accountability model. And I'm not saying that the state and federal, they're bad with but that they're designed for a purpose. Local accountability, it allows us to capture the vibrancy of 120 counties and 171 school districts. None of us are the same. None of the 600,000 students here in Kentucky are the same. So we've got to figure out a way that really capture that. I'm done talking. I'm going to turn it over to my preaching. I'm going to turn it over to Michelle.
So Commissioner, from our team to yours, do not disturb works great on the weekends for those. Dr. Kreisman is extremely passionate about this work and our whole team is as well. So let me give you a little bit of a brief backstory of how we are, where we are in this work. So about 7 years ago, we did a survey with our community members, with our chamber, with our business leaders, with our students, with our SBDMs, you name it. If you were a Fleming County native, you were surveyed. And the survey consisted of value cards, like what do we value as a community? And our values could be, vastly different than the values of a Jefferson or a Fayette because we're a rural school district. So we took these value cards, everybody gave input, and then we came back collectively as a district leadership team and said, where do we see commonalities? So we sorted them. We did the great old word sort. What matches, what goes into columns, what works. And that's where we came up with our 6 durable skills or competencies that Fleming County values and wants their students to exit upon diploma, post-secondary, into the world with. And those are, we want them to be servant leaders, be service-minded, right? We want them to give more than they take to their community. We want them to be able to problem solve effectively, be innovative in their work, have a sense of growth and achievement, not just academic wise, but personal growth and achievement, have a sense of pride there. We want them to be good team members, and we want them to be able to communicate effectively, both orally, written, and in a digital world. So those are the things that we work on daily with our students that they're held accountable to. Our board approved back when this value set was determined. We voted on it. We had lots of feedback. It's a graduation requirement. Kids have to show that they can master these skills at appropriate grade levels, and it starts in kindergarten. We have a K-12 system that we run. At 3rd grade, we begin to create a graduation requirement for them to be able to advance. Because we're committed to academics are 100% important. Standards are 100% important. But we've seen so many students that academically can move, but do not have this capacity to be successful when they leave our brick and mortar, right? So we're after both of these things, and we feel like that's huge for local accountability. We're in the process of resurveying, because it has been 7 to 8 years, right? It was pre-COVID. Things change. We may have different things we need to focus on now. So we're recapturing our surveys in the spring. So with that, again, K-12, everybody presents. When Miss Harden asked to pull out a picture, I have 3 kids. They're vastly different. Vastly different. I've got one that's going to cry when he has to present because he doesn't like to get in front of people. And I've got another one that would present in front of 1,000 people and still twirl and bow and do all the things. But for me as a parent, I know she's fine, but I need my son to be able to not melt down during an interview, be able to capture a job. I need those things for him. So the durable skills for me as a parent is more important for him than the seniors. We do district-wide scoring. So all of our teachers, we have a day that we come together, we look at their websites, we look at their artifacts, we look at their rationales, and we collectively give them a score. And we've had to do a lot of validity work on that, right? Because that's very, it's a judgment call. But we have places things in place that allow us to see if we're having discrepancies, if the scores are too high or too low. We do a lot of professional learning with our teachers on these scores and anchor papers and anchor examples and exemplars of what we should look at and be able to see from our students. They do presentations of learning. All of our kindergarten through 1st, 2nd preschool, think of it as a souped up show and tell. They present what they love. Whatever it is in the moment that they love, that they're passionate about, they present about it. Our seniors do TED Talks. It's something worthy they want to share. And yes, they've done TED Talks of why we shouldn't do websites and BPI. And invite Mr. Prieston and I personally. It's wonderful. But you know what? They're talking about it. And we ask them lots of questions, and we don't get that as often now, but that started, and we always get it in the graduation speech too. So we know we've made it. And then they celebrate their learning and defend their learning. One of the other things that we did that was really important, that was a game changer for us, or our high schoolers took value in this, is as juniors, they have to meet mastery in all competencies to be able to co-op. We're not putting you out in our community if you don't have the durable skills to be out there. And that has been a huge game changer for us because we have about half of our seniors that co-op in our community. So we have all these things. The student agency, we're highly about that in Fleming County. Dr. Creasman and I do informal discourse and our team with students every day to do those temperature pulse checks. We have our competencies. We have the authentic assessments that we're doing and the products that we're doing. We have our student artifacts, but we do have some critical missing pieces. We're still shackled to this shoreline of this standardized assessment, and we can't free our teachers to teach, right? To be good stewards of giving our kids what they need because they feel the pressures of a score. And I'm so thankful that Dr. Fletcher mentioned we're done doing an autopsy. We're going to give you some real-time data because autopsies really just allow us to examine what we did last year. We need to be able to time out, right? Regroup and come back at it so that our kids can get the best experience during the school year. So we're after this accountability model. We believe in this accountability model. We believe it's what's best for students. All students, we try to personalize learning. We make sure that it's relevant to students. So a lot of times when we talk about this to our teachers, we're like, let's not dictate both. Like if you're held to the content, then let students choose how they present, they know the knowledge. But if you're teaching a skill, let them choose the content. Right? If we're teaching an argumentative essay, don't tell them what they're arguing about. Let them feel and pick what they're passionate about. But if we need them to tell us how the water cycle works, then if they want to create a song or they want to do a podcast or they want to do some type of Canva or publish a book, let them do it. There's so many outlets for our kids that I feel like we miss opportunities because we stay in such a straight, narrow way. And the problem is, it's because that's what we all know. That's the school we went to. That's the college we went to. That's the experiences we have. So it's uncomfortable. And a lot of times we're guardians of what's comfortable. So we got to step outside of our comfort zone to meet the needs of our kids. And there's a menu of options to do that, as we know. There's all kinds of ways districts that can come up with metrics to measure the pulse of their district, whether that is community partnerships or looking at logistic measures of transportation costs and, the efficiency of how we spend our money through walkthrough data, access to school counselors. All these things are important to community members. And I would dare to say as a parent, those are the most important things to me too, right? I'm a parent, I'm a parent of 3, and I don't check their Infinite Campus because what does NTI Day 1 tell me about what they're learning, right? Like that doesn't tell me. But when I get their progress reports on their durable skills and the teacher saying, you know what, Case does really good when he can write, but if we get him up in front of people, he's still getting really blotchy and he still panics a little bit. That tells me what I can do to help and support Case. And then vibrant learning, we're constantly trying to create joy for students in the classroom through Panther Digs. I don't know if you guys saw that on the news, but we had an social studies teacher that recreated, and people were worried there was bodies being buried behind Fleming County High School because the funeral home did donate a tent. That probably was not so hard when we were digging big holes, but the kids loved it and they had such a wonderful experience from that. So with that being said, we're committed to this work and we're going to move forward with it in whatever capacity we can. We hope that it is a movement far beyond Fleming County, but we know it's what's best for our students. So we do, of course, the year presentations. We do BPI scoring days. We have growth weeks where we do standard mastery testing and diagnostic testing because we've got to pulse both and check both. We do readiness assessments, which are product-based assessments that have a lot of student agency to them. And then, of course, we do the through course standard mastery throughout the year to see how our students are doing. All students have websites. All websites look vastly different. Their writings will look vastly different. They like to show off what they enjoy. This is Hunter Ham. He will do a lot of writings. I think his last writing, if I remember correctly, was about turkey hunting and killing the coyote population and why it was important. And he gave a lot of great examples. I had no idea what he was talking about, but he knew what he was talking about, so it was something he was passionate about. And the teacher obviously scored his skill, right? His ability to claim and counterclaim, not necessarily the content of the coyote population. So with that being said, I want to end on this note because I have no idea how much time. And Dr. Fletcher said this, and it kind of set with me. He was talking about his son Eli, and there was probably 100 reasons for him and his wife to say no, right? But they chose to do what was best for Eli so that he could have the school year he deserved. So they found the one reason why it was right. And as educators, there's 100 reasons why this is hard work. But there's one reason why it's right work. And that's because the students in your building and your communities and in our communities deserve that type of work. So we are committed, Dr. Fletcher.
Example from Fleming County before we move on to the 2.0. I think it was called Work the Room.
Yes.
Work the Room. There were 20, how many students were involved?
25.
25 students, 25 middle school students walked into a room that had the Secretary of the Education Labor Workforce, had the Commissioner of Education, had local government, had actually school leaders from other districts, also had police officers, had educators in the room, and their goal was to come in and within as quickly as possible, get to know as many people as they could within 30 minutes. I was to score them on, how their interview capability on a 5 to 10 scale. But their goal was to come in and make some type of connection with each person in the room, as many people as they could, shake hands, make eye contact, make a conversation, and then get rated before they walked out. They had 30 minutes to get as many points as possible. And then they move into the hot seat is the next one. So after they look at the point totals, then they have kids that go into and do the hot seat where they have a panel that interviews them. And then they go on to the Ron Clark national competition. But can you imagine as a middle school student coming in and walking in and seeing the education labor cabinet secretary or the commissioner?
And they didn't know you were coming.
And they didn't know we were coming. They came in, shook hands, made eye contact. And if you were talking to somebody and you looked up, one of those kids made eye contact and they came across the room, shook hands. How are you, Dr. Fletcher? What do you do? What's a commissioner? This is what I am. Do you have questions for me? You're talking about interview skills. And just 30 minutes. I was like, man, why didn't I do this as a superintendent? This was great. It's great work. And that's the beauty of the networking and the connections. So thankful for Dr. Priestman and the work that's going on in Fleming County, his team, the team Fleming County, because they're inviting you to come in and see. You'll see the same types of things at Greenham County. And I'll say this before we turn it over to 2.0 and Dr. Stafford. One of the things that Tracy Moracy presented, and she presented for Northern Kentucky. And she said in 2008 or 9, I think the poverty rate in Greenham County was around 68%. Is Tracy in here? Tracy? Is that correct, Tracy? 68%. At that time, they were persisting low achieving school, high school. They had state intervention. They had all this focus on testing. Fast forward 10 years, they did the turnaround process. They worked really diligently to get to the point where they were a school of distinction. Poverty rate 68%. He said all that focus on testing really didn't make a difference in our community. So that's what the local accountability piece is. What will make a difference in where you are? And again, there's so many great things going on across our Commonwealth that's very similar to that, but we're looking at different data points. You want to talk about accountability. What impact are you having on your poverty rate in your district? That's different. That's not a paper pencil test. So that being said, I'm going to turn over to Dr. Stafford. Again, let's give Fleming County a round of applause.
What would the world look like in 50 years? What will it look like? I'm getting a shake of a head here. Get a little laugh. Can we describe it? The person, the loved one that you have on your phone that you showed your neighbor, how old will they be in 50 years? My son, I showed Dr. Fletcher, he'll be ready to retire.
And we say this every time, hopefully.
Hopefully. But we can't describe the world that they're going to be in 50 years. But yet that's the world that we are preparing them for. And you and I can't even describe it. So we have to put our students in situations that they can think critically, that they can problem solve, that they can be collaborators, so that they can take those skills that we've heard about and we've talked about tonight, and they can be successful. So those are the types of opportunities we want to give our students so that they can be prepared for a world that's unknown, that we can't describe, and yet we're the leaders, whether we're parents, whether we're community leaders, whether we're educators, we are leading our children. And we can't describe it. So we have to put them in situations that they use those skills, their communication skills, their writing skills, their thinking skills, engaging with each other, collaborating together. So when we're talking about systems of assessment and accountability, we're really using those systems to encourage those type of activities, that there is a spread to all of our schools, all of our districts for these vibrant learning experiences, so that they are prepared for an unknown future. So we're talking about two systems: assessment system and accountability system. They're linked, but they're different systems. So think about assessment system. The assessments, think about your third grade reading, your fourth grade reading, your math test, your science test, your social studies, your climate and safety survey. That's the assessment system. That's different than the accountability system. And the accountability systems are those indicators of the student performance and the school that those students are in. So those indicators, like our graduation rate, our transition ratings, those are the accountability systems. They're two separate systems, although linked. They're two separate systems. So those are the type of systems we're talking about. And we're talking about using those systems to spread and encourage those vibrant learning experiences. Where students, as you've heard tonight, students have agency over their own learning. Based on Kentucky academic standards, I heard Michelle say that the students are learning the academic standards, but they're choosing the direction and the performance and the outcome for those products that they're developing while they're learning those skills. and that content knowledge. Giving them the agency and the student choice to create and apply the knowledge and skills that they have. The example Commissioner mentioned earlier about the student who has 2 books that's on Amazon. You can purchase those. This is a 3rd grade student. 3rd grade student. Vibrant learning experiences that they're offering their students. They're learning more than writing. They're learning a lot more than they're writing. But giving them the opportunity to engage and have that relevant experiences. And meeting the students where they are, where they want to be, and preparing them for whatever that next level is, whether it's from elementary school to middle school, middle to high, or high onto their plans for after high school, whether that be college or career. We're encouraging with these 2 systems the collaboration within the communities and across communities. Within the communities, as Dr. Priestman mentioned and Michelle mentioned, bringing together your community to determine what they prioritize and what's important to them. Because who better to hold and support your school system than the people that it impacts directly? When our community members support our school systems, everybody wins. Superintendent Moracy in Northern Kentucky, I'll never forget this example that she used. She had a student that was struggling, was homeless. She had community members, because she had started this process, found out that the student was struggling. He was homeless. They found a way for that student to get a job, graduate from high school, and that student is still working in that same position now and is married and has a house now, correct? Yes. When we come together, that's what makes us resilient, is the power that we have as a community and the acts of kindness that we see and the support that we have within our communities. That's what makes us great. That's what makes Kentucky great, is our communities and the strength of our communities. Because when we come together, our students, our educators, our schools, and our community wins. Moving away from the comparison, we'll have a bit of that with the federal system, because that federal system has to be the same when you're identifying the schools in need of support and gets that extra funding for our CSI, TSI, and ATSI, those schools that have those federal classifications. So it has to be the same, but the local doesn't have to be the same. This local accountability gives the communities and the schools the ability to tell their own story, to lift up the great things that's happening in each of our districts. We've heard about the bridge performance indicators. Those indicators are what Fleming County has prioritized, but there's others that your community may prioritize. We've heard of all types of examples of differences in their local communities and prioritizing. We know that one school district is prioritizing the supports for social emotional learning. They've said that we want the resources to help our students through times of crisis or just being teenagers or younger. We want that. Another community has decided to look at micro-credentialing and prioritize that. So this local accountability gives the ability to be flexible with your community and customize it, telling the good things that are happening within our districts, moving away from those color ratings, that blue, green, orange, moving away from that and only identifying those federal classifications and then lifting up the local accountability. Providing that this innovative piece, engaging with each other and across districts, because our districts are facing challenges that another district may be able to help them overcome. So not only collaboration within your own community, but collaboration across districts, so that we bring together and build networks that we all work together for the betterment of our students in Kentucky. So that if there are districts that have maybe similar challenges or similar demographics, but that aren't geographically close, we build those networks so that they can support each other. Mentioned Fleming County and Dr. Kreisman and team had a session that I got to be a part of that had other district leaders that were engaged in the local accountability process, and other leaders from the UK Next Gen. There were other people involved that looked at their local accountability system and said, yeah, that's a little bit too much. and they took that very as a critical friend, and they worked together. But again, it was districts coming together to work together to overcome challenges.
That's the same comment I sent him back at 6:30 a.m. This is too much.
So engaging each other. We had superintendent. We've been meeting with co-op directors. Superintendent said, I know I'm going to have open heart surgery. I want the best doctor. I don't care if he or she is from my district or another district. I just want the best one. So, and that's what we're encouraging, this collaboration, where schools, again, receive feedback from each other, and also bringing in an external evaluator that is looking for exemplars. Not that they would come in and rate or evaluate in any way that say, this is positive or negative, but to look for ways in which we can lift each other up and connect people with examples of what are good practices. So those two systems, local accountability and federal accountability. Now, this is 2.0 that we're presenting here, but I'm going to tell you how it's going to change based on the feedback that we've heard. And we'd love to get your input based about these changes. So the first change you'll see in 3.0 is this graphic's going to change. It's right now it has 3 pieces. The 2 on the left, choice and local, are about the local accountability system. The one on the top right, the navy, is the federal system. So we're going to make this graphic 2 pieces of the puzzle. It's 3 now because what we were trying to do is we were trying to say there's some choice measures that are required, and then local measures that will be completely customizable from your local district. So this will be 2. This graphic will have 2 pieces. The one on the right, the statewide measures, are about the federal system. So it's going to be comparable and bring forward those federal classifications. The first one is the focus on reading and math. That would be from our summative assessment. That would be an indicator of accountability. So these first 5 bullets here are about accountability. The last bullet is about assessment. Remember, assessment system, accountability system, two different things. The first 5 are about accountability. So in 2.0, reading and math will have the greatest focus. And then that would be our summative assessment based on the Kentucky academic standards. Then the next indicator would be individual student growth. Now, when we put out a survey and began talking about these prototypes a couple of years ago, we heard overwhelmingly that people wanted to go to individual student growth and move away from the change component that we have right now. So that change component that we have right now compares school also on indicators from one year to the next. This individual student growth would be looking at where you got the student and where you took the student, particularly in reading and math, grades 3 through 8. So that indicator is an elementary and middle school only indicator. So individual student growth. And then those next 4 bullets, transition readiness with graduation rate, English language progress, and climate and safety survey, they don't change from what we currently have. They don't change. Transition readiness is an indicator at the high school level that identifies students for whether they have met criteria to be deemed ready to transition either in college or career. The graduation rate is a combination of both the 4-year and that persistence to graduation, that 5-year rate, because we want to honor the students and their parents and those educators who get those students and put the effort into that 5th-year graduation. English language progress is the acquisition of English language based on our access tests and the scores that our English learners achieve. And then finally, the last bullet there is the climate and safety survey. Now, I'll tell you, in 1.0, climate and safety survey was not in the federal accountability. It was science there instead. We heard very clearly that people wanted student voice in the federal accountability system and not so much the science. So we're not running away from science. We have work to do with science, but they wanted student voice in the federal accountability system. So you'll see that was the change from 1.0 to 2.0.
And one of the things that, again, when I, as a former superintendent, if I was sitting looking at this, I'd be thinking about personally, how does the federal accountability piece, how could it fit into my local accountability, to be honest? Yes, we're pulling it out so that we have that how do we do CSI, TSI, ATSI? But really, how do we really make a reading and math assessment part of our local accountability? If it's going to be there, how can we make it part of our local accountability? So to pull it out to say this is how we do CSI, TSI, ATSI is one thing. But also too, as a former math teacher, a lot of us think about the formula. What's the formula to put all this together? So reading, math, individual student growth, transition rates, graduation rate, English language progress, climate safety survey, which the survey right now is like 4%. So those pieces will be a part of the formula to give you that final score, if you will, or that final rating, so that you do the CSI, TSI, ATSI. Now, just like Dr. Stafford said, we've got a lot of work to do in science, from assessment piece, from other parts too, but we have to give a science assessment. It has to be uniform and it has to be reported. That's all federal guidelines, but it does not have to be a part of the formula. So we're pulling out science to work on it separately. So we're still reporting science separately. We still got some work to do, but honestly, I don't even like the fact that we have a science assessment. I would prefer that it look like more like competency-based type of assessments. But again, we're required to give an assessment. I would love to see districts develop their own science assessments to be a part of their local accountability, maybe a part of the profile of a learner or other parts as they go through to say, how does that look like in our local accountability? Project-based learning, competency-based assessments, things of that nature. To me, that's what would be ideal. But again, we are required to give a science assessment, has to be uniformed, it has to be reported. And again, the elephant in the room, we still have some issues with our science. We understand that. We've seen the scores. We know there's some issues with our assessment. We know there's some issues with how we put in our standards. And we've got work to do as a state, KDE, and also what we have to do in our classrooms. So we're pulling out science assessment, and it's going to be reported separately. Think of the power, though. A lot of people say, well, if it's not part of the formula, then it's not important. Think about the power of having a science assessment reported by itself and not part of it. And again, this is meeting federal requirements. Hopefully somewhere along the way, we can say, okay, what's a better way to assess science to be a part of it locally? That would be the dream as you keep reporting. Even too, if we could do that with reading and mathematics. But right now, when we look at the federal accountability piece, these are the things that we are required to do. And again, we want it to be uniform. If we're going to tell a district that you're a CSI, TSI, ATSI school, we want to make sure that we can meet the needs of those districts. As a former principal in 2 PLA schools, it's a scarlet letter that it's hard, but I will tell you this, my experiences with KDE in both those situations, I learned so much. Our teachers learned so much. But still, how can we do a better assessment? So again, the federal piece, we are filling, quote unquote, filling all the buckets, if you will. So what you see over there, we're filling the buckets. Now, to me, we can get to the exciting part.
So just a couple more points on that science assessment. We are looking at that science assessment, that common assessment that has to be given and reported as requirements for every student succeeds at, of giving that at grades 5, 8, and 10. So that's a difference than we've had previously in our testing system or our assessment system. So 5, 8, and 11, that's different. The other piece that is also within the science assessment are, and this is the first time you're going to hear me say this, probably ever, is that we're going to offer science assessments that you can opt into at those all-grade years. So we're going to propose in this 2.0 that there will be all-grade testing grades 3 through 10. So think about those assessments being similar to our Kentucky Summative Assessment, or those assessments that will be given at those mandatory grades, but used for either your local accountability system and for instructional purposes to give you some indicators of where your students are in relation to the Kentucky Academic Science Standards. Okay, so opt in at those off-grade levels, or if you have a better system, competency-based or more authentic demonstrations of learning for your science, then you could choose to create and do your own. Okay, so opt in to the science assessment at those off-grade levels. Now, that's the federal piece. Let's look at the local accountability piece. Some is going to have be required in this framework, and some are required, but there's choices. The first of which is social studies and writing. So social studies and writing, you'll notice that that's a big change from where we are currently, is it's not in that federal accountability. But for social studies and writing, because those are so important and so critically needed to provide our students those opportunities around social studies and writing, that the assessments that will be provided, if this goes through, will be grades 3 through 10. So again, social studies and writing, they will be opt-in assessments at all of those grade levels, grades 3 through 10, or you can develop your own more competency-based, authentic demonstration of learning in those content areas. the piece here around these are that it would be required to be in your local accountability system. So that there's a choice of how you measure it, but required to be in your local accountability because those skills and that content is so critically important. The next bullet there is your vibrant learning experiences. That's required to be in your local accountability system. And again, we've talked about a variety of ways. You've heard from Fleming County, the variety of ways that they have met vibrant learning. You've heard Alexa talk about a few examples. There's also a menu of options from the Kentucky United We Learn Council. The Accelerating Innovation Standing Committee created a manual option, a list that could give you some ideas. They also provided ways and options for districts to create their own. You may start out with just the percentage of students that are exposed or had opportunity to have vibrant learning experiences. You may first start out with your local accountability system, just putting those in the percentage of students who have it. If you're more advanced in your vibrant learning experiences, you may look at the quality of that student performance and what the student actually, how the student actually performed. And again, that would be a local choice for your local accountability system. Now, that last bullet on the chain, the choice piece has been the most feedback that we've gotten since we have started talking about 2.0. So I'm going to go ahead and just tell you what 3.0 is going to have and get your feedback on it. So in 2.0, or in a survey we put out, the respondents, there is 67% of respondents said we'd be willing to give up our interim assessment system if the state would develop it. So state.
And that's your MAP, STAR, I-rating, things of that nature. So when you think about interim assessments, it's similar to your MAP, STAR, I-rating, things of that nature.
Yes. So state would develop interim assessments for reading and math, grades 3 through 10, to be given in the fall and in the winter. It would be with the same vendor. That would be the goal. It would be the same vendor that creates that summative assessment. So it would be similar. It would have a similar look. It would have a similar feel than the summative assessment would. And it would be based on the Kentucky academic standards, so that you have a cohesive system. So your students would have some idea about how they are performing in relation to the Kentucky academic standards. So 67% of respondents said, yes, I would be willing to give up my MAP, my STAR, my I-read. But when we went out to superintendents, not so quick to give those up. So, and I understand that. Districts and schools have a lot of investment, a lot of maybe decades of data, and their processes developed with their student data coming from those interim assessments, ELCs that would be developed that would have those that data and be aligned to those. So 3.0 will have interim assessments as an opt-in choice. Okay, so the choice would be, again, that the state would create those interim assessments, provide those in reading and math 3 through 10, and the district could opt into those, or if they chose to stay with their own, they could stay with their own, and that would be paid for by the district. So the option, those are, again, choice measures to be included in your local accountability system. Commissioner?
So one of the things that we keep in mind, the summative assessment, you can't opt into. That's where the CSI, TSI, ATSI, you can't opt into that, okay? So what we're talking about here is the 2 interim assessments that we would want to align with the summative that would still give you the same type of instructional data that you're getting now. Now, one of the other ideas we've talked about is there a way that we can also get like grade level equivalency? So essentially, if you were looking at a test, we'd have to have at the core of the test, if you will, Kentucky academic standards. And then wrapped around that would be the adaptability piece, where you could say, well, this student may be a third grader, but they're achieving at the fourth, fifth grade level. Because a lot of times that's the kind of data that our parents want to hear about. What grade level are they on? They really don't care if they're proficient. They don't. I mean, you're listening to the commissioner. You can quote me on that. A lot of times our parents really don't care about proficiency on standards. What they want to say is, if my kid's a third grader, are they reading on the third grade level? Are they doing third grade mathematics? So one of the things that we're looking at in the new assessment model is how do we make sure that we also try to give that type of data also too. But now there's only one other state that's looking at that. I think Alaska is the one that we're familiar with that's looking at how do we incorporate state standards and have that as the core of the assessment and be able to still give you proficiency as far as that the state standards, but wrapped around that would be the adaptability piece to say, okay, are they on the fourth, fifth, or sixth grade level? So those are some things we're talking about with the interim assessments. Now, again, the words that you've never heard from KDE or from the state or from anybody is opt-in. You've never heard that before. So we know districts have invested a lot of money into iReady. We know districts have a lot of money into math and things of that nature. And if you want to use that, that's fine. You probably have to give us a 2-year commitment because the budget cycle is on 2 years, and we have to give that over to the state legislature. But those are some of the things that we're looking at interim assessments. Now that goes back to, that's how we're trying to give you information that you don't have to wait till the fall of the next year on. So that's why the idea of that in those interim assessments was how can we get you more real-time data so it changes instruction tomorrow, or allows you to give you your assessments or your MTSS and your groups and other things, those interventions that you do. Maybe you finish the test on Friday, Monday, ready to go with what's next. So that's really the idea behind those interim assessments. Because let's face it, you're already doing that with MapStar and iReady, right? Why can't we make that part of the state accountability system? Now, the interim would be assessments, not accountability. The only other thing that we didn't mention is when we talk about growth, going back to the federal piece, we'd be comparing where did a student finish at the end of third grade versus the end of fourth grade. Now, I'll tell you why. Thanks for asking. We don't want to base it on the beginning of the year versus the end of the year because a lot of districts will be tempted to tank the first one so they don't get that CSI status at the end and get the full growth. We don't want any type of gameplay. We want to make sure you get authentic data. And the other thing too, as we go into the local accountability, you're not going to hear me to talk about how you put together local accountability with a percentage and then federal accountability as a percentage. Because I don't want any district to feel like, you know what, I've got to get 100% on my local accountability, so I'm not CSI, TSI, ATSI. If you give me a local accountability system where you're 100% across the board, it's not worth the paper it's written on, nor is it worth the website's posted to. Because it should be about growth. What do our communities expect of us? How are we short? What's our improvement plan to get to the point where we grow? And then if you ever get to 100%, find another measure. Again, celebrate that 100%. But again, trying to remove, this is not, for me, it's not about competition. This is about giving every single kid across the Commonwealth the same type of opportunities that we're going to find in Fleming County, that we're going to find in Raceland, that we're going to find in Greenup, that we're going to find in Johnson and Paducah, Mayfield, Taylor, and everywhere in between. You'll never hear us again talk about red, yellow, blue, green, and all that nature. Because we really want to lift each other up, not tear each other down.
The other piece that we've heard from our local superintendents is the idea of adding K2 assessments into the mix. Because they've said, you know, as we were talking about this interim assessment and in going in that direction, the idea came up and said, well, why don't the state take on the universal screener and the progress monitoring? So in 3.0, it will also include that K2 as an option to move forward with. So that's going to be in, you guys are getting since you're the last one. Look forward. So yes, so that one's going to be in there as well.
And listen, we only had to wrestle 15 social studies teachers in the first two. No, listen, they've come up with some great ideas and talking about, first of all, how do we get across the idea just because the state is not giving an assessment and a part of a formula, that doesn't mean it's not important. You got to get away from that. What's important to your local community? And again, Dr. Stafford, go ahead. We'll talk.
And just the last piece there, we've talked about multiple times, engaging your community to determine what their priorities are for your local district, engaging them and connecting that with their local portraits of a learner. A couple more points, and then I'll turn it back over to Commissioner, is that this is a future plan. So we are looking forward to the future of assessment and accountability. These ideas here will have to have legislative changes. So we know that we have to make these things as part of a statutory requirement. We would have to have legislative changes. And so what we're looking toward is legislation for consideration in the 2026 General Assembly. So literally a year from now, having the consideration for our General Assembly. So we're looking past that. You've heard that districts are already engaged in this work, and it's a journey. I think in 2017, you all Fleming County started the work on the portrait of a learner, and in 2022, the local accountability system. And they're still working on it. And 3 years later, so it's a journey, it's a progress. So we have to meet districts where they are with this, and starting out with a pilot phase, and then moving forward and expanding that, and then eventually coming to sustain it statewide. So we're thinking about this as legislation in 2026, pilot 27, sustain 28, 29. I mean, we're looking toward the future of assessment and accountability. So those are ways in which we want to engage and continue to engage in the conversation around what and how to prepare our students for that world that's unknown.
And we understand that we just can't flip the switch. And everybody's on board and we're ready to go. You can't flip the switch in general session in 2026, then in the fall be ready for this new local accountability. For some of for some it's old work, but for some it's brand new. But I think it's exciting work. I think we have the opportunity to get it right. Now, even this model, and I'll tell you what I'd love to see the commissioner hang around for about 8 years. They don't run him off from the state legislature before. They might, because I do have to go through confirmation again in 4 years, Lord willing. That's always fun. But that being said, if there's a change in accountability, I want you to make that change, not the state. That's why we're looking at streamlining down the federal piece. And then if you want to make changes in your local, and you should, because your community's changed. So what does that look like? So that piloting phase is very important in the beginning. And then expanding that, building the networks. How do we grow to that second group that's ready? And then finally sustaining that as you move into that and to having everybody on board with local accountability. To give you an example, Woodford County's been working on this, I think, for 2 years. They don't feel like they're going to have a full accountability model ready to go till 28, 29. And what they're talking about is it's kind of a reiterative process, if you will. They feel like that they should be refining in 28, 29. Maybe have something ready 27, 28, but the refining will be 28, 29. So we realize it's going to take time. But when we connect you with other districts that are moving along with this work, I think it's exciting. There's so much potential. Now, as far as our journey, and you look at our moonshot again, let's go back to this. And then I hope that if you have you seen this, this is the only way, in my opinion, that we can have something that is useful and meaningful to all learners. The only way that we're going to impact the students in Mason County is if that local community is going to tell the Mason County District exactly what they expect and the data that they want to see. I've even heard as part of this process, there's some districts that they may not, districts are asking themselves, okay, we need you to be transparent with your funding. So put charts on the districts, putting charts on how they spend their funds along with student achievement work. That's what their community wanted. Got to be willing to be transparent. So for us, we've gone through 4 prototypes, two different models, and Dr. Stafford, you do have the benefit of being the last group to see what 3.0, Lord willing, will come out in the next couple of weeks after the input that you give us too. Hopefully reinforces some of the ideas we've had, but also gives you the opportunity to have input. We've been building legislative awareness. We've did a study phase. We've done a lot of different surveys, and we've made changes. We're listening. We've made changes based on those surveys. I promise you that Ron DeSantis didn't pull out a model 3.0 a year ago and said, this is what we're doing. Because to be honest with you, a year ago, I would never dream we were here. But after listening to so much input, this is exciting. Again, just like I said earlier, I think we have an opportunity to get it right. So again, we'll go into recommendations and have a model to our board. We've talked a little bit. Our board actually gave us input in moving from 1.0 to 2.0. We're talking about the Kentucky Board of Education. Mr. Steve Trimble is back here with us today. Thank you for being here, sir. But we sat down with our board in 1.0, and some of the big changes dealt with science. We made those changes along with the cool council, and then that's why you see that difference in 2.0. So it's important to have that feedback. We want to engage your General Assembly. We hope that you believe in this enough that you want to call your legislators and say, hey, look, this has potential. This is something that we believe in. Because I promise you that Robbie Fletcher alone, KDE alone, Brian Creasman in Fleming County alone, we can't be the only one that's lobbying for this. We have to have other people talking about the potential changes and what's going on. And again, going back to Shelby County has a beautiful dashboard that has all this data and charts, but they also have people, literally interviews of people telling the story of the difference that's made in their district. That's what we need from you. We need you to tell stories and what you see in its potential. So think about that picture you started at the very beginning. Makes me a little jealous. I wish I was 12 again. To be able to go through this, or at least my kids. I'd love to see my kids think something. Would you like to see this for the kid that you saw in your picture? And hopefully you're in districts that you're seeing some of this already. Maybe you're seeing some pockets. Maybe you're seeing some small things that are happening. Like, man, I'm so proud of Boyd County because we're doing this in our district. You know what? How does Boyd County share that with Fleming County? And then how do we expand that? There's so many great things as I look around the room that's going on in so many districts. How do we expand it? How do we make it bigger? How do we make the absolute best system? That picture for that child that's in your picture. That's our goal. That's our goal. Now, you do have a bunch of QR codes. So this is another one, how you can stay engaged if you like, but also remember there's other information here on the card. So make sure that you take note of that to stay engaged and get us some information. But we do want to do a little bit of turn and talk. We're going to give you about 3 to 5 minutes to look at a partner and say, this is a wow. This may be a question I still have. And we'd love for you to, after you're finished talking, give us the wow and the wonder. So let's take about 3 to 5 minutes with a shoulder partner to say, this is a wow. This may be a wonder. Zardy. Now, all right, it's your turn. Wows and or wonders. Anyone.
Not sure I need this. I have a teacher voice and a cheer voice. I work in a very wonderful, wonderful district, and I'm so glad when we started with our face. My wonder is how will alternate assessment students be accounted for in transition readiness and graduation rates? I have an FMD baby, he's mine. And his teachers are wonderful. He's made tons of growth and they have worked so hard. We have hired resources, we have hired aides. They take the KSA, they take the TAR, and then they count as a dropout. That's hard. I mean, that's hard as a mama, and that's hard as somebody who manages the transition readiness for a district that's at 113%. To see my child coming down the pike, gonna end up a 0.
And you do realize that's a federal requirement.
I do,
All right, thank you.
I do.
And believe me, we lobby all the time. One of the things we talk about every time that we're in any type of federal setting, it's ridiculous. Our kids are doing the absolute, giving us the hardest, our teachers give us hardest. So we agree with it. But I will tell you how this looks like, for example, in Shelby County did a defenses of learning. So part of their accountability and their defenses of learning, they had the students that were in alternate assessments. They were learning processes. They were doing different things as far as part of their class within their FMD class. And their defense of learning was, in trying to get across the process to their parents, was their parents came in and actually were the ones that reviewed their defense of learning. They went through the process of making ice cream with their parents and then shared the ice cream with their parents. And then the parents and the people in the room evaluated the kids and talked about exactly what they did well and how they could grow. That was just one example of a defensive learning. Now, as far as alternate assessments, we'd have to look at, to me, how do you include that into a local district? Along those same type of lines, we've also talked about like ELL students. To me, to have an ELL student, to have the opportunity to have a local business person that speaks the same language that they do, and they defend their learning to that person in their native language and celebrate their culture, that's really a true defensive learning. So we would allow districts to be as creative as possible as we can federally to do those defenses of learning and how they would implement that into their district. Anything you'd like to add to that, Dr.
I just want to put a point, exactly what you just said, that whenever we are in front of federal representatives, we advocate for our students, and as does every other state in the union. So it's not just a Kentucky issue, it's a national issue that we need to overcome.
Thank you.
And it is absolutely absurd. I don't know how it's legal, to be honest. It is. That's probably the best way to put it. It's inhumane. It really is. Okay.
This is a very specific question, but today I had a conversation with a group of people and we were wondering, like, if we went to, say, India and we were there for a year and we were presented a test in Gujarati. Did I say that right? Mm-hmm. And we were presented a test in Gujarati over science or reading or math. Like, how would we do? We didn't have a translator. We weren't able to use Google Translate. So my question, I'll tell you what my question is. Are we going to, on our state reading math, the required tests, are we going to have translated tests? Is the vendor going to provide those? Or at least allow us to let our kids use Google Translate?
That's two things that we've been talking about with our interim assessments and summative assessments.
So with online translators, it doesn't always translate directly and could lead to inaccuracies of the items. Because when you get into science, social studies, those really technical terms, there's no way a online translator can translate those. So that would put the student in an unfortunate position that they may know the content, but not be able to provide the information back based on the fact that the translator was not able to make that translation between the English version to your Indian version.
Didn't we have like a vendor that would provide paper translated copies for the kids?
Well, one of the things I'll tell you is going on in Jefferson County right now is they are actually piloting a system. very similar to what you see you see all these earpieces in the United Nations. So they're looking, I think, at using audio enhancement, which is a company that some people may use, that you still have that microphone on. And then students, the teacher will speak, student has the microphone and earpiece, and they hear it in their native language. And then when they speak, the teacher hears it back in English. So I think we've got a long way to go, and I think AI is going to help us with that. But I think somewhere along the way, we've talked about first, maybe even piloting that. Let's start off with Spanish. But let's face it, there's 120 some languages being spoken in Warren County right now in the school system. Over 140 in Jefferson County. So we got to let the technology catch up, but we probably have to start somewhere. But one of the things we've been talking about is, do we want to provide, I've asked Rhonda Sands to look at, Texas provides theirs in Spanish and in English. So what does that look like? Are we really truly assessing the content? Because also too, we still have that, they need to, from the federal standpoint, how they translate into English. So with that being said, I think we've got some work to do from the technology side to get to that point where this is just prevalent elsewhere. So we're not there yet, but hopefully we get there.
K-12, when we have 21 ESL kids, that yellow kids that all of it, 2 of them are accountable to us. That's a good chunk of our population.
And that's one of the things we've talked about with, that I don't think a lot of people understand with student growth. By going to student growth, you essentially have 3 years to onboard those students into your full accountability piece on the federal side. So the first year with student growth, they take the assessment. The second year, their growth is part of the model. Then in the third year, then they're also part of the status, if you will, too. So by going into that student growth model, that allows that onboarding to happen over 3 years. I think I got that.
Is that just for kids?
Yes, that is an exception that is offered by the U.S. Department of Education. Right now, we're using exception 1, and that's where the student, if they're recently arrived, they don't take any of this assessments other than just for participation. This, what Commissioner is referencing is a different exception, the one that we're exploring.
So again, trying to give you more time to get to that point. Again, it's not fair to the student. And until you get to that point, at least if we're going to have to do this in English, if we can't do it in other languages, let's try to do some type of longer onboarding so that it's more fair.
But the thing with that, the issue with that exception, that recently arrived students would take all the content periods. Their first, so if they came in, right before the assessment or 2 weeks before the assessment, they would take all the assessments. That would set their baseline in that first year so that you could see growth in the second year, and then the third will be growth in
Status. So we got some work to do. Others?
Hello, my name is Stephen Harris. I'm with UK King's Daughters. I do workforce development there. So I'm a different lens in the room today. Lots of wows and wonders, but this kind of hits both. For the systems using this already that you looked at and mentioned, how does private industry fit into the learning experience? And are you using employers as part of instruction or on-site experience through these programs?
Yeah, so as far as performing with the co-op experience, I spoke on that they do have to get mastery of the durable skills that our community finds value in, but not just that. When they do their exit interviews and when they even do their interviews, they all have to interview. So one of the things that we found as an issue in Fleming County was kind of like that mom and pop thing, like I know so-and-so, so I'm gonna work here as co-op. And we've just completely done away with that. They interview based on their website. So we send all employers their website. And that way that they can highlight their strengths. It has to be within their pathway. So it has to connect to that point and they have to have an interview. So those are just good practices that we should have been doing all along somewhere. we missed the boat on. And then within our exit interviews for our seniors, we bring in, as far as workforce and private industries, we bring in people that, are, applicable to, their career choices. So if they're in engineering, they're in welding, we're bringing in people that can make connections for them to move them forward. And we've actually seen, some private industries along with some community members offer scholarships to our welders and for next step. So we just try to make that full circle connection of knowing where our students want to go and helping them get there.
To add to that, I'll use Shelby County as another example. They actually brought in, I think Fleming County's done some of this too. They actually brought in businesses within the community to say, what do you expect from us? You know, how can we help you build a workforce? So if you look at, I'm going to get his name wrong, the gentleman that's part of the Portrait Learn there, that's the business leader that actually leads their work. Mike Hexford. Yeah, I think that's his name, Hexford. He is a local, he owned the business, and they got to the community, said, you know, what's our biggest issue right now? It's workforce. So they started engaging the school system. The school system invited them in to say, okay, what kind of pathways do we need to offer? And what type of experiences do we need to offer in order to get them to make sure we're impacting our local community, to make sure we're getting that workforce out? Because let's face it, we all want our kids to come back home. We want our kids to come back to where we are. And that way, by involving those local communities, they were building a better workforce. They're also making sure kids are more prepared, but also too, allowing those business leaders to come in and say, these are the type of data points that we want to see also too. And a big part of that is also your defensive learning, having those scholarships offered. You know, if you do a defensive learning and a kid gets a welding scholarship, when they walk out your doors, that's so amazing. But that's a strong bond between your business leaders and your school.
Sure, thank you. And I just want to add that, you know, some of this stuff's happening here locally. Lloyd, Brina, Florence, we work with them now through high school in their health pathways. But the issue that I'm seeing with that is that they had to choose those pathways in 8th grade. So what education did they have before making that decision? And then once they get in the pathway, sometimes they're almost trapped in the pathway. So I would recommend, from my perspective, to get the knowledge to them before they have to choose the pathway and then find themselves going down the wrong lane and can't get out of it. There's kids that aren't in the programs that we do that want to be, and there's some that are in it that want to do something else. So I think 8th grade and 7th grade is a real pinch point for that. So that's just my
Great point. I'll use Spencer County as an example. One of the things that you're seeing more across our districts is more career exploration happening in middle school. For example, in Spencer County, I think they do a PAX lab where they have 30 different modules where students do a career interest, and they'll come in and do a 10-day session. All their students rotate through this. They'll do a 10-day session specific to a certain career. For example, I went in and observed some kids one day that they were doing biomed. And so one of the things they were learning how to do was wrapping ankles, wrapping wrists. That was part of their exit work that they were doing for that 10-day portion. There's another group that was learning how to program drones, that they had to, first of all, do all the research behind it for the first few days. Then after that, they had to learn to do some short programming. And by the end, they had to program the drone to do a certain, move up, so far, flip, turn back down. But we have so many middle schools that are doing more of those career explorations. Now, I will tell you, as a former superintendent of Lawrence County, we got away from that, telling a student you had to be a completer. Okay? If you change your mind and you want to go to a different pathway, we didn't make it about funding. You can change, because we would much rather you to change your major in high school and save mom and dad a lot more money later on, but try to give them those opportunities to say, if you don't want to, if you got into this for 1 year, you thought, you know what, I need to change and I want to go to another pathway, we allow that. Now, the problem is, if you want, they can only have a certain amount of time to get as many classes in as they want, but we were allowing those type of changes. And I think you'll see more and more districts doing those things too. I will bring up Floyd County. Floyd County even does they do a coloring book for their kindergarten students that has like maybe an animal and then also to a career that that animal's associated with. So they start talking about careers even in kindergarten, which is amazing to me. But it's a coloring book, but it's where they start. So you see more and more of our middle schools doing career exploration, even some of our elementaries in that 4th and 5th grade did some career exploration too. But we need to expand that. So you're absolutely right.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Other wows, wonders?
It's adjacent to what he just said.
Well, this is for the video.
No, Bath County shares with Montgomery County, the ATC.
Mhm.
So we're talking about careers and pathways. One of the issues we ran into is we had an opening and we really pathway looked at HVAC. But to hire an HVAC teacher, there were so many requirements to hire the person. So many hours, they had to be a licensed electrician, so many hours, plumber, so many. It was a unicorn. We had to choose a different pathway because no one met that. Is there any opportunity to?
We've been talking with legislators about, instead of requiring, say, a person to have their associates at, under a certain point in time, if they have a master's, like a master's certificate. So if they have a master, they're a master electrician or master plumber or something of that nature, then they can come in and teach as if they have the associate's degree. So we've been working with legislators on how to change that, look at different options for CTE. So again, a lot of times, I agree, we kind of create unicorns sometimes with the requirements and trying to learn more from our district to say, how do we change that to give people, first of all, we want qualified people, and I think we all know that. But also too, but if you've got a master electrician that's coming back and wants to teach after he's ready to retire, his work is waiting, or her waiting gold. Absolutely. So trying to work with legislators on how we change that through the Office of Educational Licensure and Effectiveness, and also with our career technical, with Beth Harvest.
That was the issue. They had several applicants.
Mhm.
But like they had to have every single one of those, and okay, they were 5 hours short of this. So, and so that we had to pick a different pathway solely because there was no flexibility.
And that's one of the things that we look at opportunity access for all kids. In order to have that, how do you maybe remove some barriers? And we need to do that, and how we work with legislators to make those kind of things happen. But I'll give you another example. We all know about the teaching shortage, right? I highly recommend you look up Senate Bill 253. We've been working with Senator Higdon on a teaching pathway. So if you have a teaching pathway within your school system, then they can get dual credit throughout your teachings, throughout your high schools. And then when they move into colleges, looking at all the teacher scholarships and bundling that through that, teachers, if they're a part of a teaching pathway at your schools and then go into a 4-year college, they pay no tuition. So those are the kind of things that we're trying to work on with legislators to remove those type of barriers, because we need educators. So if you want to look up Senate Bill 253, Kia is on board with this too. So we've had Kia in the room, and we've also had Senator, of course, now I won't give Senator Higdon, he was one of the first ones that got us together and said, okay, how do we do this? And we basically got everything we've asked for in that bill. So hopefully it will pass. But do those same kind of things for career technical. How do we remove obstacles? That way students have more opportunity and access.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome. Okay. You have some cards in front of you. I believe we have cards out. Am I correct in that? No, we don't today. We can do it on the scanner. Okay. If you have a question that we haven't answered, please scan and send it to us. Or if you have a comment. I'm going to close with this, and it's not something I'm particularly proud of. Okay. I was hired in Lawrence County in 2014. Bless it. Love it. All NLC. Now all NKY. But our goal, we were so focused on test scores. I think there are people in Lawrence County can attest to this. We were so focused on test scores. We were so focused on making sure we had the math and reading scores. Yeah, Ms. Fitch, you remember this. We were a PLA district. We were taking kids out of some of the things they really enjoyed to give them intervention. And lo and behold, 2015, 16, we put red and black banners all up and down Bulldog Lane because we finally met our goals. It was so exciting. We hadn't hit our testing goals maybe ever. It was a great accomplishment. Our teachers worked very hard and our students really performed because they loved us as much as anything else, to be honest. And then I had a staff member come and say, this is great, Dr. Fletcher, but are you relevant? I wanted to fire the person. Let's be honest. What do you mean, are we relevant? We just hit the test scores, and that's what we're hired for. You care to look, give me your resume, we'll send it out somewhere. 2 weeks later, I had a student come up to me and say, Dr. Fletcher, I want to drop out. I said, I'm sorry, what? You don't offer what I need. I can go start working, I can drop out, get my GED, go get a welding job, and be making more money than any teacher in this district in less than a month. You're not giving me those opportunities here. You're talking about taking a cut because you were celebrating the test scores, but then you had a young man, Mr. Ross, come up and said, you're not relevant for me. So we changed our focus. We added in the career technical piece. We added in things to give kids pathways, give them opportunities. But we still have a long way to go when it comes to vibrant learning. How do we make sure that those students have the fences of learning? They have the work-based learning of all the opportunities that they can. Lawrence County, we still have a long way to go. But still, this local accountability model allows you to build that system that's going to be relevant for each child in your district. And I promise you that the commissioner cannot write an accountability model that fits Racing, not nearly as well as Barry Colon. I can't write one that's going to fit Lee County. Even though Jim's been out of it a little while, he can still do a better job writing an accountability model for Lee County than I could, or anybody in KG for that matter. We want to empower you. We want to give you the ability to dream on behalf of your kids. So if you have any other questions, we'll be here for just a little bit longer. Thank you so much. And if you have anything at all, please let me know. We'll go from there. Thank you so much for being here.